second edition of this webinar. We ran a webinar for the first time on marketing on the 29th of August. It was on marketing effectiveness, really deep topic. And we heard from some really amazing voices on the subject, Masala Phillips and Gaynor Ireland. And if you've not participated, or if you didn't participate in that webinar and you'd like to see it, please do go to events.dailymaverick.co.za where you can watch the recording. Let me welcome our guests for today, our very special guests indeed. Jessica Wheeler, I'm going to start with you. You're currently the marketing director at Nando, South Africa, but have a career in producing commercials, graphic design, a kids' educational platform, and have also been the MD of an advertising agency and a large one at that. By way of introducing yourself, Jessica, can you please just tell us a little bit about what keeps your kind of creative mind ticking?
Thanks, David, and hi, everyone. Yes, I have a very, very colorful history in the industry, quite, I suppose, always closely related to marketing and creativity in some ways. I'm very fortunate. I get it. I get to spend all day, every day in a creative environment, exposed to design and art and amazing creativity. So I don't actually need my juices to flow much more than they do already. I actually need to spend a lot of my time switching off and just making space just to absorb things. So I'm very aware. I'm very fortunate to work in a pretty creative space. So I get to do it every single day.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jessica. And if you as an audience member have never been to the Nando's offices, wow, they're a very special place to visit. On to our second guest, Robyn Lewis. Now, Robyn is the current general manager for marketing and brand at MTN South Africa. She's got over 20 years of experience in the marketing world, and I've known Robyn as a colleague in a previous role, and she has worked across organizations like Unilever, South African Breweries, and KFC, as well as strategy consulting. Robyn has got sharp wit and a great sense of humor, and I think I know the answer to this question actually, but I'd love to know what also keeps your creative mind ticking, Robyn.
Yeah, thanks, David. And good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to be here, to be having this conversation. So for me, I think, first of all, it's probably around my curiosity around human beings. They really fascinate me. I think sometimes I find I'm a little awkward myself. So I'm often observing and trying to just understand why people do the things they do. And I think also you would know that I'm an avid foodie. So for me, I really like to try to find time to just let those creative juices flow, and create something. So my background is largely strategy and market development. So innovation really excites me, bringing new things, moving a category forward. So those are the kinds of things that really I love, to bring ingredients together, bring people together, hear different opinions to make sure that, you're getting the best outcomes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robyn, and thank you, Jessica. So a reminder to all the guests as to how this is going to work. I'm going to pose some provocative questions to the panel members, and if you've got a point of view on the question or their answers to that question, please do pop it in the chat, and then we'll pick those up. And we can't get to everybody's, but we'll try and select some of the more interesting ones, and then I'll ask those back to the panelists as well, and see if we can get their answers on your questions. So let me start up with this really broad observation and question, which is, I was reading the Daily Maverick online newspaper this morning, and what popped out for me was a big number. It said 77%, and it was actually above the ad for the session. And it said that 77% of executives recognize that creativity is a crucial driver of growth for business. Now, can you each of you just elaborate on that for a couple of minutes? Just help us understand, what does creativity bring to your marketing party in order to help deliver that growth? What contribution does it make? Jessica, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I'll kick off. Please call me Jess. Only my mum calls me Jessica if I'm in trouble.
Okay.
So Jess is great. I think you'd almost be silly in this day and age to ignore the impact that creativity can have on your bottom line, not just on your marketing holistically. I think it does become a point of differentiation. I know, if I speak personally in my experience, particularly here at Nando's, creativity is the secret sauce. It's what helps optimize our budgets. We operate in a category that has budgets that'll, make your head spin. We don't. So really creativity helps us maximize that. It helps us get that stand out, particularly from an ad perspective, helps us keep our salience levels at comparable to people who are spending 10 or 20 times more money than we are. So it's really important from a comms perspective, but I think equally so, and not nearly enough discussion happens around the way that creativity shows up in other parts of the marketing mix. It's not just about making cool ads. There is creativity, Robyn spoke to it earlier, creativity and innovation. There is creativity in channel. You've just got to look at the likes of, Checker 6060, and that the creativity it took to get that platform and that channel open and performing. You can't underestimate those things just because they're not showing up as a TV ad. There is creativity in everything. It's not just in ads, and it really is the secret sauce.
Thanks, Jess. Robyn, do you want to build on that? You got a point of view on this?
Yeah, I love what Jessica's saying, because the way I like to look at it, David, is that creativity is actually the rising agent, regardless of what you're doing in the value chain. So if you're baking a cake, it's the quality of that rising agent. It's the ultimate amplifier, right? So no matter how you look at a problem or whatever problem you have, you've got to apply a creativity lens, because that is how you create distinction. And the reality is our products are extremely complex at the moment. And I think that's part of why we may be losing our way, is we're not simplifying, we're actually creating and adding to the complexity. So you have to apply that creativity lens to be able to simplify and distill. Because I think, creativity has to be based on a truth, whether that's a human truth, a category truth, a value chain truth. Those are the ones that really are the diamonds and the nuggets that you can polish. So totally agree with Jess. It's, it should be part of your DNA, part of your culture, in terms of what you do and how you apply it.
Yeah. Thank you, Robyn. I'm loving the use of metaphors, by the way. So ingredients and rising agents, and we can keep it fun and interesting. I'm going to be a bit provocative now, and we'll come back to the points that you've just raised. But I want to go to the other side of the spectrum, because there's quite an extensive conversation that's happening out there in the world at the moment in this industry about the lack of creativity. And Adam Morgan, who's from the global consultancy Eat Big Fish, and he's just written or co-authored a paper called The Extraordinary Cost of Dull. He says that the thing that should scare us the most is not rejection, it's indifference. And he quotes three other commentators on the subject. One is Thomas Heatherwick, who's a designer, and he has put out a piece of content talking about the global blandemic. He also quotes Alex Murrell, who talks about the age of average, and that all our interiors, architecture, logos, media, packaging, and ads all are starting to look the same. And if you don't believe that, Jokkel Solberg wrote a very interesting piece did a piece of analysis on some data from the car manufacturers, and looked at this fact that 40% of the cars sold in 1996 were monochromatic, that's black, white, silver, or gray, and then 20 years later, in 2016, that figure has increased to 80%. Can you believe it? So everything around us, are we converging on bland as a society, and is marketing part of the problem here? Are we kind of reinforcing conventions and the same old tropes and the kind of dullness that by just playing into what's been done before? Love your views on that. Robyn?
Well, I'll let Robyn go first. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And David, I know we've had multiple conversations on some of these topics, but it's I think we are potentially contributing in a way to bland. I think there's a lot of short-termism that I think, has been rearing its head as an overarching trend in marketing, where we are sacrificing the future for the short term. And I think that has contributed to some degree. I think that we sometimes, we're not curious enough about the impact that our solutions are making on customers' lives. We think that they really desperately want to get the features list of our product, and there's a place for that, from a channel perspective, but maybe not necessarily in the way that we want to inspire our customers and potential clients. So I think we are potentially contributing, and I think there's a lot of different reasons for that, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. But Jess, I'd love your view on this as well, because you work for a brand that is exactly the opposite of that. It's hardly dull. So I'd love your perspective on what you think. Is there a problem with the rest of the industry?
Yeah, it's such a tough topic, and we probably 1 hour is never going to be enough, because I must admit I don't know how I feel about. That statement, blandemic. Whoa, that's pretty hard hitting, right? I don't buy into the narrative that creativity is in crisis. I think creativity is distracted by the actual crises that are happening, right? Unemployment, that's a crisis. Food inflation, up until recently, that's a real crisis. And I think often creativity feeds off the zeitgeist, right? That's what makes it so powerful when it works. And I think particularly in South Africa, for the longest time, we've been living through the most. And I think the creativity in some respects is starting to reflect that. So it has, Robyn's absolutely right, become very short term. And as marketers, one thing we are very good at is success sickness, right? So we run this short-term thing, maybe it's a performance marketing campaign. Guess what? It works. Guess what? We can attribute it 100% to a sale. Oh, that worked. We'll just keep doing it because nobody's going to get fired for being safe and doing it with the numbers behind it. So I think we're a little bit distracted by the short-term need, to spend a little bit of time propping up business results, opening up new consumer markets, funding pricing, if that's the case. I am perhaps naively optimistic that it will come back. And I think, and I know this sounds so esoteric, but I think you can almost feel it in the air at the moment. As soon as, particularly in Joburg, spring arrives, everyone's feeling a bit better. We had, good, better than expected results from the elections. Interest rates have just been cut. So it feels like there's a little bit of magic back in the air. So I do think it's going to come back. I wouldn't call it a crisis. I think it was a distraction, to Robyn's point, for various reasons, some good and some not so good.
Okay, interesting point of view. Did you say success sickness? Is that what you...
Yes. If you think about it, if you think about it, when things are working, you don't change them because you're too scared to break it, right? So you keep repeating the things that work, and you don't make changes or harness creativity to think of new ways because you have a way that proves that works, right? So we call it success sickness.
Okay, yeah. I really love that. Is that a Nando's term, or is it your term? Is it?
No, I don't know, it's not my term, so I'm not going to dub it. I probably stole it from somebody who said it, who was much smarter than I was, but it just hits home because that's a human truth, right? Success sickness is a vibe, and that's what it feels like we have at the moment.
Got you. Okay, thank you, Jess. Robyn, did you want to make a point on this as well?
No, I think Jess has captured it well, right? I think you're right. And I think for me, there's lots of different reasons. And I think partly, marketing, they say, you shouldn't leave something as important as marketing to the marketing department. So it means that actually, we need to collaborate with business partners, right? And I think that for me, David, the marketers have somehow lost their confidence a little bit. To be able to lead those conversations and our muscle memory and practicing using that muscle of really being able to debate about and be the voice of the customer. That's the piece for me that I think we've got to get back to, that discipline, and really championing the customer. That's right. The key thing.
Right. Thank you. I do get Jess's point that there is a little bit of an uptick in energy and we're feeling it around us at the moment. And I think that's right. There is, however, some data globally around communication and how it is not doing as good a job as it should be in respect to connecting with people's emotions. And I want to make two observations just to frame this point. One is that there's a company called System One who use human emotion to test ads, and they've tested on the premise, right, that powerful emotions actually drive growth and engagement and all that good stuff. And they've tested over 57,000 ads, and 47% of people say they feel nothing from watching that communication. That's quite frightening. Earlier this week, I also saw a cartoon from, I don't know if you follow Tom Fishburne, the marketunist. He's fantastic. And he had a cartoon that said creative review by committee. So it talks to Jess's comments. And he in his write-up, he's got this wonderful phrase. He says, creative work is usually not Darwinian survival of the most interesting ideas. It's survival of the safest ideas, and safe ideas tend to be neutral. So I'd love your point of view on this, because we do tend to kind of, in our ways of working, play to safe and play to what's worked before. And that's, I guess, what you're calling success sickness, Jess. I mean, how do you get past that in Nando's? Because, I mean, at every kind of dinner table conversation I'm ever at, the topic of Nando's advertising comes up and how creative it is. So, like, how do you get past that as a business?
So, I mean, I think your kind of review by committee point is really valid, right? And I think we are so conscious of having diverse points of view at the table, diverse inputs into the process, different points of view. But at some point, somebody's got to pick up the ball and run with it, right? You can't let this idea of bringing everybody along and everybody has a voice, which are all valid things early in the process. But at some point, somebody's got to be the brave one to stand up and run with it. Because if you're looking for consensus, what you're going to get is the average. And that's exactly what you're talking about, right? So I think potentially, and certainly not in my experience at Nando's, but historically, it's when things are, it needs to be approved by these 12 people before we can go ahead, where you just know, and if I put my old agency hat on, you just know that thing's going nowhere. What you're going to get back is a generic category observation with a call to action, and that's what's going to happen. So I think, and again, it goes back to the people that sit in marketing chairs to say, we are the ones who have to pick up that ball and run with it and make the decision. It's infinitely easier if you work at a brand that celebrates being courageous and, gives you the scope and the runway to make brave decisions. But if you're expecting that something stand out or hyper creative or super interesting is going to come via a committee of approvals, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I love that. So we've got a couple of points here from the audience, and one from Janet Berger, one from Michael Cook. They're related, so I'm going to read them out back to you, and maybe Robyn or Jess, you want to comment on this. Creativity often comes with risk. Aren't clients becoming more risk averse? That's one point. And Michael Cook's point, that was from Janet. This is from Michael Cook. How do you make a case for creativity to a CEO, CFO? To take calculated risk on it. What are your views on the risk equation or conversation, rather?
We'll let Robyn go on that
one. So this is a very interesting one, David, but I know that often when I'm looking at creative work, I have to actually switch my brain off, right? And I have to figure out, does this make me feel something? Because if it doesn't make me feel something, then most likely I know that this is work that's actually going to be, run of the mill, vanilla. We kind of tick boxing it. But and actually that's the conversation we need to kind of have with the business is, what does it make you feel about the brand, about the business, about the solution? In order to be able to influence people's emotions and their sentiment towards the brand. And often what we do is we start with our head first. I will often, my gut reaction is the one I trust the most initially. And then, of course, you post-rationalize, right? You build the rationale, you build the influencing, the persuasive comments. But actually, in the risk matrix, I find your intuition is probably the most? And then also, is it on brief? Is it strategically clear? Because it doesn't start with when you're evaluating a piece of creative, it starts with the inputs to the brief, and how you're designing a CVP. So it's a real my very bugbear, because not every marketer gets to influence upstream in the marketing value chain. You sometimes get it at the end of the process. I really want marketers to be banging the door down. We need a space at the product design blueprint, to be able to influence at that point. And so that's also the bravery that Jessica's talking about, to be able to go into those conversations and influence them.
Yes.
So it's risk comes right through.
Sorry about that.
Managing risk comes right through the process.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you don't arrive with, hey, let's have an emotional conversation, Mr. CEO, because that could be quite a risk. You have kind of woven it into how the product is designed, develop the service experience is designed and developed. Okay. I mean, I'd love to talk a little bit more about this topic, because I think it is really, from your experience, how do you sell emotion at a C-suite level, and how do you get people to connect with things? And I think helping people appreciate the need for tension in communication is really important. So there's not just like show and tell, right? We're actually creating tension. Mm-hmm. I love this, this reference to Jean Le Carre, who's a famous novelist, and he says, the cat sat on the mat is the beginning of a story, but the cat sat on the dog's mat is much more kind of tension-driven story. How do we kind of like make sure the right, Robyn, you say briefing is important up front. How do we make sure we've got the right tension in our communication, that we're solving something for people? People are overcoming something by looking at our communication or engaging with our marketing.
I'll kick off there. So it's infinitely easier to bake tension into something if you start with the intent, right? So if you have an intention of creating a piece of comms and just for the purpose of simplicity, let's just say it's going to be a piece of video content or a TV ad or whatever, because that's the easiest way for people to kind of picture it. But if you start with the intent of telling an actual realistic human story, there's going to be tension baked into that, because that's what human beings are, right? They're complicated, tension-filled people who are fighting all sorts of battles every day. I think when you start with saying, look at this great product, it is made out of 98% recycled plastic, it's going to be really hard, So I think, and Robyn's spoken about it a lot, about having a voice of the customer or the consumer. So I think if you are obsessed with telling human stories, using real insights, not tweets, because tweets are not insights. It's like my pet hate. Then that tension is going to come. And if it's almost a lot easier to do that, and almost becomes a muscle that just happens. You don't have to come back and say, oh, guys, this script doesn't have any tension in it. I've seen plenty of scripts that didn't have tension in it, but that's because they were scripts about a product, not about the people that the product served, right? So if you start with people, the tension is almost innately baked in if you're doing that justice.
I really love that, Jess, and I want to double click on that a little bit, because sometimes we kind of try to be all things to all people, trying to appeal to everyone, when actually the tension lies in being attitudinal about our communication and our messaging, and not just talking about our target market as demographics, but actually talking about an attitudinal description of them. We're for and who are we not for? We're for these kinds of people and not for those kinds of people. Do you have that kind of conversation inside of Nando's in respect to who you're targeting attitudinally?
Oh, we do, depending on the objective or the task at hand, right? I think there is merit in saying, okay, for this particular piece of comms, we are going to target all category users. That's a very broad bunch of people, right? But that has a very specific job to do. I think we do have attitudinal segments, which we use quite effectively, particularly on channels like social, where you can have a little bit better degree of targeting. Even on some of the digital out-of-home platforms at the moment, there's a great degree of targeting. I think the challenge with the attitudinal segmentation is when it's used recklessly or lazily, right? Because I think then what you get is a slew of work with like, we are going to show young, Black, aspirational South Africans achieving their greatness. And then everything becomes about that, right? So we all end up adopting these same kind of, those are broad attitudinal. I mean, you can't say that being young and aspiring to be better is a human insight on a specific group of people. So it can become quite misleading when people are like, yes, we're going to use this attitudinal segmentation, but actually it reflects the hopes and dreams of every human being to ever have lived. So used in the right place, absolutely. I still think there is a role for reaching all category buyers, particularly when you're doing long-term brand equity building.
Yes, if it's top of funnel brand building stuff,
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think it does help, though, to be really clear around what kind of value system you're targeting as well. So there's a really good example of a hotel chain in Europe called Citizen M, and they use this description, which says, we're for people who take the train but drink champagne. So they really focus on, an audience who's value seeking, but they actually know that they care about something else as well, and they double down on some of those things. So that's quite an interesting way to handle it. I've got a question from the audience that I'd like to, a couple of questions actually. Maybe I can just touch on those quickly. I don't want to take us off stream, but I think it's important just to acknowledge these. Let me start with this one, Bohang, for Robyn. How would you advise mid to senior marketers who find it hard to influence and drive creative business solutions when internal stakeholders prioritize short-term goals?
Yeah, hi, Bohang. I think that is probably one of the questions of the moment. So I think it's not an easy task. And I must admit that sometimes I've lost battles. So you don't win them all. But I think marketers have to have some bravery, like Jess was saying. So you have to have that bravery, but you also have to have grit, right? And resilience to be able to keep going back. And trying different angles. So I think when you will eventually get to a piece of work that is so great that it becomes the proof. So don't give up is my first piece of advice, because it's too important to give up. So keep at it. And I think, it's not easy to win people over, but I think if you keep having the conversation around where the customer voice is, what the customer impact is, I think that's where you are going to convert people. Because I don't think that marketers and business are misaligned in wanting the outcome to be better for customers. So I think that's where you'll find common ground.
Yes, thank you, Robyn.
Can I share on that? Sorry, I just want to life hack. I'm telling you deep dark secrets from our agency days, and it's something that's really useful to me still when trying to get buy-in, if there's any particular kind of sticky situations. When you work at an ad agency, you learn a very specific rule of give them something to shoot down. So you always go in with, when you're coming from an ad agency to a client, you go in with 3 options. You actually only want one of those options. But if you give somebody a yes or a no, you're only ever going to have a 50-50 chance. If you give them the options, it shows, we've thought through this. There's different ways in. You can obviously fight harder or motivate harder for certain ones, but it gives people, particularly if there are people who have a long-standing kind of tension with marketing or not wanting to approve it, it gives them something to shoot down so that, internally they feel better about themselves. And in my experience, 80% of the time you'll walk away with at least progress, or if not, selling in the thing that you needed everybody to buy into. But as long as you give them options, give them something to kill, it helps, particularly in the boardrooms.
Something up for sacrifice. I like that, Jess. Thank you. That's a good hack. I've got a question from James Moffat. Hello, James. What are the key client behaviors that are destructive to the creative process? That's quite provocative. And I think to that, not like you, James, to be provocative, but Hofmeier, CMOs are increasingly bound by metrics and it's hard to measure creativity or link it to ROI in a concrete way. I guess these things are related, over measuring or measuring the wrong things, perhaps. But maybe back to James Moffat's questions: what are the behaviors internally that start to kill creativity or the creative process?
Spot the agency leader posing good questions. You go first, Rob.
For a short time, I worked with John Hunt, and he used to talk about sunrise people and sunset people. And I think they, for me, raining on an idea very early, I think that's a behavior that I think, when you don't give the idea enough space, that's the first thing. I also think that because we live in a really competitive environment, right? You cannot not acknowledge that the pace is often really fast in what we have to deliver. And sometimes, I guess, the lack of forward planning in terms of, giving a space to talk about what are you actually trying to achieve with taking something to market, whether it be a piece of brand communication or a product. And I think we are guilty sometimes of doing that. That's not to say that ideas can't come quickly, if you have the right inputs. And if you collaborate with the right people. Also, when Jess was talking about, having to collaborate as well, I was thinking, how do you create sometimes a little bit of a vacuum through the process where it's not by committee, where it's just a smaller group of people. So because you do find that people are included at the wrong stage, or too early, or too many people, and that can really derail you, if not everybody's on the same page. So there are some, definite behaviors that I think can contribute to that. And of course, it goes without saying, lack of strategic clarity. We don't want to choose, David. We don't want to make the trade-offs. So so we try to do everything. We want to be all things to all people.
And not all ideas at the outset are good yet, right? I mean, sometimes they need a bit of oxygen to give them an opportunity to morph or grow. Another door for us. Is that true? I mean, Jess, is that true in your experience?
I think absolutely. I believe that great ideas take time, and they often aren't scheduled time, right? You have your best ideas when you're in the shower or in the traffic or doing whatever, cooking. I don't cook, so I don't know much about that. But I think that there's also and I'm only bringing this up because it's feedback that I've had from agencies as well, is to say that it can also be really destructive not to kill something quick enough, because we're nice people, right? And we understand, and I'm particularly empathetic with creative people because I know that's a piece of your soul that you're presenting or putting in front, and you're giving it to me to judge, and I think often you have to kill the ones quickly so that you can focus. So if you've got six broad directions, I think it's great that agencies bring clients in early and not like, ta-da, here's a 80 slide PowerPoint on this one idea that we've decided is the best one. So I think, being part of that process early, but also killing and just giving agencies that degree of focus to say, out of these six, 4 of them are not going to do. Those 2 have got potential. You can see that they need a little bit more space or a little bit of nudging. So I think in some respects, not killing stuff quick is also pretty destructive. I think 2 of the other things are when internal teams are not empowered to make decisions. So, an agency or a partner or a consultancy may present to a client, but actually the person they're presenting to isn't confident or doesn't have the authority to make a decision. So now they must take it internally, and then it gets lost in translation. That is incredibly destructive. We have a rule that if you're not in the meeting, you don't get to have an opinion, because if it's important, if it is that important to you that you want to impose your opinion, then show up at the meeting, show up on time, and be present. Don't sit on your emails or whatever. It's really destructive because that thing then gets presented by somebody else with the wrong end of the stick or whatever. That's super destructive. And linked to that is making sure the decision makers are in the rooms. I could think. I mean, James can probably tell us 30 other reasons.
Yes.
Clients can be destructive, but those are some I can think of.
So in respect to this point around, addressing the quality of the idea early, how do you spot a good idea? I'd love to just talk about that for a minute. What is a good or a bad idea, and how do you what are the early indicators of it being a good or a bad idea? Let's hear about that. Robyn, do you want to go?
Yeah, that's a very interesting one, because I think it's so situational, right? Based on the brief. And I often look for tension. And for me, if there's nothing in there, nothing that kind of piques my interest, because sometimes it's a data point in the work or a headline that you go, oh, there's something there, and then it also sometimes leads you to challenge some of your own perceptions around what was the insight. So I do believe in tissue sessions, right? Like Jess was saying, bring the client in early, not to craft the work or prescribe the work, but more to challenge and check and challenge and debate the insight. Are we on track? Are we keeping on moving? So I don't think there's a one size fits all, David, because I think it is situational. I think it has to be evaluated against the job to be done. And I think you have to often, agencies typically will present to you in the morning or the afternoon. I usually say, I really want to sleep on this. Because actually I know my brain's going to process, and I'll come back in the morning. I'll give them an immediate reaction, like, this is my gut feel, guys, but can I sleep on it? Then I know that it's probably something I need to think about a little bit more or process and come back. So that's how I would deal with it.
And often you can see quite early on whether or not a seed of an idea has the ability for you to kind of dial up the drama or dial up the tension, or make the emotion greater, or play it out in a variety of different ways. I think often that's just a gut feel thing from a marketing perspective in terms of experience as well, right? Is that true, Jess?
Yeah, I think it's that old thing of you'll know a good idea when you see it, right? Or it's an insight when you see it. Nobody can explain what an insight is, but it is. I think if we, I'm quite fortunate to work at a brand that has a very distinct tone of voice and a distinct way of doing things. So my first litmus test is, does it make me laugh? All the stuff I have to deal with on a daily basis, is that 30-second explanation of this rough idea, is it funny? Yes. Absolutely, cool. Then there is something there. So I think looking for that gut reaction, that initial gut reaction, is important. And then, as you sit in those sessions, or as you sleep on it, or whatever, I love it when I can start thinking, oh, it could live in social in this way, and oh, we could do this in PR, and maybe we can do this with influencers. So it just shows that it's not just a big idea, it's a long one, right? So it can stretch across different channels. But absolutely, it is totally a gut reaction. And we particularly look for things that are funny and that we're maybe a little bit terrified of. Then we know it's probably in the right thing. If we're not worried about anything, it's probably too safe.
Okay. And safe is not a place you want to be, right? Because it doesn't take
right?
difference. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. I've got some other provocations from the audience. Here's one from Jeremy Sampson. Hi, Jeremy. Often the marketer or brander is younger, sometimes a lot younger than the execs or the board. Is that a problem?
Sometimes it is, actually, because ageism is real. So yes, yes, there is a power dynamic without a doubt. But again, David, for me, it's again about where you're rooted, right? And I do think that young people who come into the marketing department, I've seen so many of them come in with so much energy and so much flair and have it really beaten out of them, right? But I think that's also why it's incumbent on the more senior and experienced marketers to mentor and help coach them, and prepare them. Don't let them walk into the lion's den, at least without a spear. And so to help them and teach them, right? And also just to help them in their times of defeat, to encourage them that, there will be another day and another moment to take it on. But yes, it can play out like the way Jeremy is describing it, because there are sometimes power dynamics, and you have to acknowledge that. But I also think that CEOs and business partners want to be wowed. They are yearning as much for great work, standout work, make themselves and the brand famous. So I think that, we shouldn't give up, and we should make sure that when we go in, we are prepared. Because I do think that you have to prepare your persuasive argument. You have to build your narrative before you go in. Don't show up and show the work and expect the work to just, talk about what you're trying to achieve, and then, sell it in.
Absolutely. There are very few clients these days, obviously category dependent, who aren't trying to create engagement or connection with younger audiences, because they are the future, right? So, playing into that is a real opportunity, as a young person presenting to that level, to actually be the voice of the actual target market, if that is what the brief is about, right? So I think there's also opportunity in it too. Jess, I see you nodding. Do you want to, have you got a view on that?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I still consider myself the young person, but some days, particularly like today, my back's not feeling that young. But I think, Robyn makes such a good point that you have to have a degree of humility. You have to have a degree of respect, and you have to be open to just navigating, a board or an exco of people who have got way more experience than you do. Of course they do. They may have been at the company for 20 odd years. I was still in school. They have stuff that you can learn from. And I think as soon as you meet it with a degree of humility of, tell me what you know, I'll let you know what I know, and somewhere in the middle we're going to meet. It's not a them versus us, old people versus young people, or men versus women, or marketers versus finance. It's just having, and I think it's increasingly, in my experience, happening more and more, just this understanding that we're all trying to do the same thing. You hired me because I have a different opinion to the person who was in the position before me, or to the person who works in supply chain. So let me have my voice, but I'm not going to come in here and tell you that everything you've been doing has been wrong and it's never going to work. There's a huge degree of humility and respect. And I think I generally find the more I try and sponge off the things that, people who have been at Nando's for far longer than I've been, get all their learnings. They know loads of things. So I don't have to make those same mistakes again. I don't have the liberty of making all those mistakes again. So humility is absolutely, and being prepared, and, being smart. Smart young people are as respected as smart old people.
Yeah, lovely. And I mean, the value of a creative mindset, right, is your ability to kind of stay humble and observe what's going on around you, and then highlight what is insightful about that to other people, whether you're young or old. So I think that kind of crosses the age spectrum. It's the ability to be able to see things that perhaps other people haven't, and then open the door for them, because that creates perhaps even another door or another ladder to climb. So I think, yeah, it's a good topic of conversation. I'd like to, in the next 15 minutes before we close out, just talk about sometimes a trend I often see is that brands tend to focus on the same brands in the category that they're competing against, and kind of end up trying to be better than someone, rather than trying to be better for something, which is, being better for something for your target market. And is that something which you see a lot of, that we kind of get stuck in our oh, look what they've just done. We need to copy that. We need to be better than that. Or, this kind of fast follower mentality. I do see a lot of it. I don't know if you see a lot of it. I'd love your views on that.
Yeah, Robyn? I'm sure you see lots of it all the time.
Yeah, the reality is that that sometimes products are also, me too, right? So products are very similar, and they don't have differentiation or distinctiveness baked in. So so there you have to kind of just think about, okay, somebody once taught me, if you don't have a CVP that's really fresh and distinctive, think about what's the story you want to tell. So the storytelling element, and the category, I guess, insight helps you there, right? To unearth something that's fresh. And maybe it's something that will help you renovate the core, that will help you renovate that product and make it a bit more interesting, to promote more affinity for it. So for me, yeah, I think that's how I would think about it, because the reality is sometimes, you're not always working with a product that is inherently distinctive.
Yes. And by way of example, let's do lowest common denominator stuff, right? So baked beans, do you compare yourself against other baked beans brands, or do you say, we're better than avocado toast? Like, how do you define your actual competitor set? I don't know if you're aware of this brand called Innocent Drinks in and they do a really interesting job. Every time they get to number one in their category, they redefine them. They redefine the category so that they are always number two, and they're thinking like a number two, which is a really kind of interesting provocation for being able to push. All right. Yeah. You had some views?
I think you're spot on. I think this idea of acting like a challenger brand, whether you are one or not one, is absolutely valid. And challenger brands don't position themselves against the competition. They position themselves against the best of themselves, right? So, and it is hard, guys. It is hard when, if sales are under pressure, people are under pressure, and the categories being redefined by cheaper entrants, or, your most best-selling product is now ubiquitous. It is difficult to stand in your own kind of truths and your own strengths. And you have to consistently also redefine what those are, because very quickly, if you've been a challenger brand long enough and you've got enough kind of eyes on you, competitors will start taking some of those things, right? So you've got to start introducing. We speak about distinctive brand assets all the time, right? You could wake up in 7 years' time and what you thought was your distinctive brand asset is being taken by somebody else. You've got to you've got to keep looking at it. But if you don't stand in your own truth and stand in your own kind of benefits to people or benefit to society, or if you're purpose-based, those kinds of things, and you're just consistently chasing the competition, God, it'd be exhausting and expensive.
Yeah. Absolutely. Robyn?
Yeah, no, 100%. And so look, I've been lucky enough to work in organizations where, I've been involved in product design from the start. So one of the brands that I love is Robertson's, and there we kind of honed onto the fact that it was about people expressing themselves through food. And so that wouldn't have come unless we really started to think about how do you create distinction, because herbs and spices are literally sold on price to a large degree. But you build the social currency, you build the social salience through trying to find those gems of insights that you can really work with.
Lovely. Thank you, Robyn. So I've got some poll results back, by the way. There was a poll asked earlier, does marketing have a creativity problem or a problem with creativity? And 77% of people are saying, yes. I can't say whether that's quantitatively valid or not, or reliable, but I do know there's over 500 participants on this call, so perhaps. So 77% saying yes, 23% saying no. And then a point from in terms of wrapping up, right? Because I think we should do a bit of a wrap up in the last 10 minutes that we have. There's a question from Lisa who says, we say marketing must make people feel something. what emotions do we want them to feel to take action? Are they always positive emotions, or are there other emotions that we want to tap into, which is a really interesting question. Let's deal with that one first before I do a quick kind of round robin wrap up.
I'll start. I mean, I think it's likely largely determined about your, on your brand positioning and your tone of voice. But I also think there is room for negative emotions. And I think the best advertising will have both. It will have people who love it and people who hate it, right? They have very different emotional responses. But I think when you're dealing with things, and I'm casting my mind back when I worked for a financial services company. And when we try to sell funeral plans, but guys, you can't be sad. I'm like, but funerals are sad. People dying is sad. Like, I don't know how out of touch you have to be to make a optimistic, inspiring thing that makes people feel happy selling funeral plans. It's got to be appropriate, I think, for what it is you're trying to do. But I think emotions, if there is a response, it's better than no response. And it's always going to be polarizing. So you're going to get great emotional response. You're going to get people who hate it. You're going to get people who cancel you. At least they care enough to comment.
Yeah, making people care. I love that. I think that's a really good answer. Robyn?
Yeah, David, some of the best. So I've done a lot of advertising research in my time as well, and some of the best ads actually run the gamut of emotions, right? It's not a single emotion that you actually are conveying, because, like we were saying earlier, people are complex. They have different emotions and they respond to different things. So I think the best ads actually touch on a number of emotions. I think that you can also make people think something different. You can provoke them to have a different point of view around something that they believe the world to be, and that creates a feeling. Sometimes a discomfort about where they are, and so it inspires them to act. About a cause that you might be kind of wanting to associate your brand with. So I think you have to think about the gamut of emotions. And I do think, as South Africans, laughter, that's why Nando's is so popular. We are inherently people who have a sense of humor.
Yeah, absolutely. And humor is proving to be something that the world needs right now. And if marketing and creative marketing that can bring more of that to the table, I think it does create connection and obviously engagement. As a part of summing up, I'd love you just to each reflect on what are the one or two or three things you'd like to leave with the audience as kind of directional advice or just your own views, so that they have something to kind of take with them from this session. Anyone want to start on that?
Yes, I'll go if that's okay. Oh, you can?
We'll have a quick summary. I'll be quick because I wrote them down so that I wouldn't get distracted. So I think there's four things that I think are kind of important and worth reminding yourself on daily, if not weekly, if you don't have the time. The first one is distinctive brand assets. So important, such an underused superpower. It's just going to help kind of drive that frequency, drive that salience. And I think we are not disciplined enough as marketers to sweat the most of our distinctive brand assets and plaster them everywhere consistently and shamelessly. Really, really important. That drive for an emotive response would be number two. Feel something. Something is better than nothing. And as you get, kind of exercise the muscle well enough, you can start deciding whether you want that to always be funny or always be optimistic or always be thought-provoking or whatever that case is. The third one is thinking long-term, not short-term. That is hard. I fight that in my head 6 times a day, is to, kind of be the voice of long-term sustainable brand building so that one day my kids can work at Nando's because there will still be a brand and there will still be a business. If we did short-term one pricing cycle after the next, there's likely not to be anything left, by the time my kids are old enough to work. And then my last one, which is, I said it earlier, but it's worth saying twice, a tweet is not a human insight. Don't listen to Twitter. It's such a strange place, and it's my pet hate when people are like, here is this insight we found on Twitter. That's an observation. If there's enough people having similar observations, there's clearly something there worth digging into. But we can't do marketing on based on tweets. It's just not going to work, and it's my pet hate. So I'm just going to leave that one as my last one.
Thank you. I love that one. The difference between an observation, a human truth, and an insight is really understood. Robs.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with that muscle around customer insight, David. That's got to be the most fundamental for me around, really making sure you have conversations with people. And I must admit, it's a discipline, right? That you've got to practice, and you've got to expand your view and really check in with customers so that you can get to the real insight. I think also that we've kind of lost a bit of the fun. The craft that came from the craft. I was chatting to someone earlier this morning, and that person was saying how we've lost metaphor, we've lost characterization, we've lost the fun, and I really I'm hugely optimistic about that, getting back to that. And how do we make people see themselves, in all their complexity, but holding up to the beauty of being human. So that craft and that fun, I'm really looking forward to bringing back. And I think the last point is really around seeking collaboration inside of the business, looking for your allies, that will help you to create this environment and this culture of being customer-led and then bringing the fun back into what brands represent and the craft.
I love it. Thank you both. That's been a very inspiring conversation. I think I've learned a lot from it, and I think the audience has as well. I really appreciate both of your time that you've made so generously to kind of give your points of view and your insights back to us. I was in a kind of online conversation yesterday with a creative leader, actually, who many people might know. His name is Matthew Bull, and he's an advisor to AB InBev and Heinz and other companies globally. But he is talking about institutionalizing the creative process and building principles in organizations to help them stick to the respect for creativity. So something that we might explore in a webinar to come. So I'm going to see if we can kind of get him into one of our future conversations as well. But thank you all again. Lovely chatting with you both. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Robyn. Thank you to the audience, and take care, everyone. And we'll be letting you know when the next webinar is, probably in early October. Take care and thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Jess.
Bye, everyone.